Hello. Ooh, can you hear me? Yes. So this is very intimidating. I'm not going to lie. I've been hiding backstage because I didn't want to meet anyone because I was so scared about having to come on after all those amazing speakers already. So, breathe. I'm here to talk about superheroes and villains and why changing and saving the world is so hard. So, I've been lucky thus far. A lot of the products I've built have had an impact, and that's kind of amazing. But it's given me a unique perspective sometimes on maybe why creating that kind of impact is so hard. If I look familiar, it's because 2 years ago I did speak on this stage at Mind the Product with far fewer people because it was after the pandemic. So there's a lot of faces that I can see here. And I talked about Maslow's hierarchy and how to use a product framework. Look at that talk. It's probably better than the one I'm going to do now anyway, so you'll be better looking at the video of that. But I'm going to start this talk similar to how I started that one, with something that someone told me. As Emily said, I work in healthcare, and I had a doctor take me on the side once and say to me, "Randeep, a product you build will kill someone. A decision you make will kill someone. What can you do to make sure your conscience is clear when that happens?" Everyone in this room has gone really quiet and it's like, what have we got ourselves in for? Okay, yes, it can be a heavy topic, but I aim to make it as light as possible. There is something universal in that experience, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And you might also think, why is he talking about superheroes? What's this kind of Marvel rubbish he's going on about? Stories are interesting. Stories tell us how to behave. Stories tell us what's good and what's bad. They tell us what's right and what's wrong. And there's something interesting in thinking about this world in reference to Marvel superheroes. And it's not new. We've been having stories, fables, parables, the Bible, for generations. So I think, of course, the fairy tales of today are the Marvel superheroes. So we'll be looking at what happens with great power and great responsibility, which is what every product manager loves. But I will not be talking about product frameworks. This is much more about understanding what happens to us as leaders when we're thinking about products and our users. So, what can superheroes tell us about saving the world? Okay. So what are superheroes? I'll briefly introduce what superheroes are. So, what do we know about them? I can tell you 4 things. Of course, they're helpful. Fine. They overcome adversity. Yes, there's always a challenge, there's always an obstacle. We'll be talking about that in a little. They're nice to animals. And yes, this is a trope you'll see all the time. If you want to know who the hero in a movie is, the person who saves the cat or pets the dog, they're the good person. I'm a film nerd, so you'll see this again and again. And finally, there's probably a bit radioactive, but let's park that for now. So, for those who don't know, I'll introduce myself with my little origin story. So, am I a superhero? Well, I think I'm helpful. I do a lot of work helping people of colour, built the COVID-19 app, helped set Teach First up. I work at getting people of colour on boards. I do a lot of work in the LGBT space. I'm on the board of Terence Higgins Trust, which is a HIV charity. I was a Yahoo LGBT role model for the last 2 years, and I'm on the board of an LGBT startup. And of course, I'm nice to animals. So what else can you say? There you go. But my day job, I was a director at Babylon, which is the largest GP surgery in the UK, and I was helping to build their Rwandan healthcare system, which I'll talk about a bit later. I was also Chief Product Officer at a company called Reliance, which was headquartered in Lagos, and I was building healthcare in Nigeria and Egypt. And currently, I'm doing some freelance advising, and I've helped people at the Alan Turing Institute and others. And so for the end of this talk, you want to have a chat? Call me, maybe. So that's my origin story. Let's go back to this superhero malarkey. So, there's 3 things I'm going to talk about today. The first is the challenge a superhero faces. What's their obstacle? The second is the challenge of a bystander. Why do these people keep running into burning buildings? What's going on there? And finally, the villains. Why is creating real, meaningful change so hard? So those are three things we're going to talk about. And let's start with number one, the challenge for our superheroes. What is their obstacle? Now, this is a bit of audience participation. Hands up, who would like to have products that change the world? Who would like to have an impact in what they do? Brilliant. That's everyone. What's stopping you get there? Now, this is actually a really important question, which it took me a while to realize. I'm trying to be really honest and frank with everyone in this room, because 2 years ago I got on stage and talked, and people were I had a really positive response. But on reflection, I realized that maybe the challenge I was talking about wasn't the real challenge I was facing. Not the challenge of your business, not the challenge of your product. What's your challenge stopping you having that impact? So I'm going to rewind to what happened during COVID and then re-explain one of the stories I told before. June 2020, some of you may have heard this, the government had spent 3 months building a COVID app. It failed. At that time, I was working at this private company, Babylon, the largest GP service, and out of the blue, I get a phone call. And it's the Department of Health going, we've inherited this thing. We need to build it. How would you do it? Give me some thoughts. So I had it was like a Friday evening and a Saturday. I had a couple of conversations. And I was talking about how these are the things you need to do so the lower income people who have twice the death rate can be helped. And the people of colour who have twice the death rate can be helped. And the black community who have 4 times the death rate can be helped. And in terms of talking about that inequality, the government realised they didn't really have anyone internally who could help build that app. So within 3 days, they asked me to leave my job and join the government, and I did. Everyone was telling me it was the wrong thing to do. What can you change? It has already failed. What do you think you can do any different to the smart people who came before you? So I said yes, because, it's about overcoming inequality. It's about helping the communities I care about. But was there something deeper going on? Was there a little bit of arrogance going on? Was there some belief that I might be more than I actually am? So I walk into government, and the reality when I walked through the door was not great. So I had to build an app in 6 weeks, and I was like, I don't care about the politics, office politics, government politics. This is like politics in every way, shape, or form. Just get out of my way. Let me do my job. I think this is very familiar for lots of product people. Build fast, having to deal with politics, and having people get in your way. So I walked into that job thinking my obstacle is, let me do my job. These people getting in my way, stupid people, annoying people, people not as enlightened, as smart as I am, obviously, because, I do product, I know everything. So here's an example of one of those parts of the project. Very small, but quite indicative. So for those who don't know, maybe people not from the UK, the purple background is the NHS COVID app. That's the thing that would ping you and tell you were exposed to COVID. Great. There's only 2 official languages in the UK, English and Welsh. That means those are the only 2 languages this app was made in. Now let's think. All those communities that are affected by COVID, it feels like they don't need those 2 languages. So we got the app translated through a lot of hard work. I managed to convince people to translate it in 12 languages. Great. Here you see Punjabi on the screen. So we've got assets and apps and everything. Problem, how do you pick the language? So, the app, you could pick the language of the operating system. So if, you wanted the app in Punjabi, you put your phone in Punjabi and the app automatically changes. Or my preference, to have it in the app. Someone like my mum, she keeps her phone in English because sometimes she needs me or my sister to do stuff. But all her apps are in English, in Punjabi, so the ones that she uses daily are in the language she's more comfortable with. So I was like, well, I want to do it in the app. The agency who were doing the building was saying, it's more work. You're creating more hassle for us. No. We'd prefer to have it easier, so let's have it in the operating system. That pushback didn't sit well with me. It didn't feel like my lived experience. But like any good product person, I was like, okay, fine, do some research. The agency, who were attached to the development agency, did the research. They then arranged a big meeting to present the findings. I didn't ask for the meeting, but they pulled out the big guns to try and pressure me into accepting the results of this work. And lo and behold, the results said the language switch isn't needed in the app. Huzzah. But it just didn't sit right with me. I felt like someone was trying to pull one over on me. It felt a bit off. So I started interrogating in this meeting with all these people. I was like, how many people spoke more than one language? Everyone, Randy, don't worry. Everyone that we spoke to spoke more than one language. But how many people had English as a second language, like my mum, like others? A silence and an oops. So great. Guess what? I'm here to do a job. I'm here to stop incompetence. I've done it. Victory lap, high fives all round. I'm a winner. I'm a superhero. Yes. I'm not the hero Gotham deserves. I'm the hero Gotham needs. Honestly, this picture, like, Stable Diffusion did a good job here. So, yeah, okay, brilliant. I'm Batman. Or am I? So let's go back to actually what happened in that meeting. Granted, I hadn't arranged that meeting with the research and design team, but that meeting was public. They'd brought in all the big guns, their bosses, their seniors, people they respected, to try and pressure me into doing something. I'd undermined what they were doing, and what's worse, I'd humiliated them. I'd made them feel stupid. So while I was doing a victory lap, I was like, I'm a hero. They were like, you're absolutely not. They were furious, to the level at which it actually stopped me in doing some of the work I needed to do, because they essentially sabotaged me along the way. They did not want me to be successful. They did not want me to be right, because I had wronged them so badly in their eyes. So I was there thinking, I'm a superhero. Let me do my job. But what I hadn't really appreciated was what was happening inside me, what the obstacle I was really trying to overcome. I was insanely stressed. The people who were supposed to be helping me, I thought, were getting in my way. They'd become an obstacle to my success. And in my thinking, in that stress, in that superhero mentality, I was like, do you know what? I'm the one that can save this. Only I can actually help fix this. And as I often hear product people think, yes, product are the Messiah. And with the words of Monty Python, I don't think I was a Messiah. I just think I was a very naughty boy. So what was happening? Yes. In the words of a much better storyteller than I, Terry Pratchett, evil begins when you start to treat people as things. And the learning from that piece of work I did was, I walked in thinking I was some sort of superhero, thinking that product was going to save the world, thinking that people around me weren't capable of actually being able to somehow magically see the insight that I was going to deliver and bring, which was wrong. I was treating them as obstacles. And the challenge with that was, unbeknownst to me, there was a power dynamic at play. In that meeting that I had more seniority and power, and I hadn't acknowledged that. The lack of acknowledgement meant that when I was asking my questions, as innocently as they started, I was actually punching down. And after I was proven right and had done the great job of, product savior, I was acting like a bit of a dick. Because ultimately, I was doing a victory lap when I should have been checking in with the team to see how they felt after they'd been undermined so badly. There is a dangerous thing that happens with product thinking, which means that we think we're the best people in the room and no one else has good ideas. So my first lesson, as hard as it was to accept now, was I basically had to accept that I'm not the savior. I have to work with others. Now, maybe that's less profound for others, but it was definitely enlightening for me. So part one, okay, don't be a savior. Seems straightforward. Now let's look at a different group of people in this superhero kind of model. So we've had the superheroes. What about the public? Why are these annoying bystanders constantly running into danger? And for that, let's think about who the public themselves are. So, stop and think about the public, your users, the people who pay the bills so you can make sure you do your jobs. Often in these movies, the public fall into two camps. Some illogical, unruly hordes screaming and running and ransacking and pillaging, and helpless, innocent sheep who happily run into any danger that's oncoming. These unruly mobs, they cause problems, they don't care about consequences. And what ends up happening as product people is we force them down, we put pressure on them to make them do the things that we want them to do. We're wrestling them to the ground. And these helpless, innocent victims, they don't know any better. We have to save them from their own stupidity. So we spoon feed them because they're not capable or competent to do what they need to do. Unless we made that UX journey so easy, they're incompetent. So why do we think of users this way? How many of you actually do think of some of your users in that way when you stop and genuinely think about it? But instead of thinking about the users in that way, the question we often fundamentally forget to ask is, why are they acting like this? Users who have got those two camps of behavior, why are they acting in such strange ways, in ways that we wouldn't expect them to? Back to movies. What's happening for the public? Why are they acting like this? Because Skybeam. Yes, all these superhero movies have giant beams of light coming out of the sky, terrifying all of the users. Because people have this thing which is the end of their world. Users are stressed. Instead of thinking about the stress, we force them into the way that we want them to be. Whereas actually, thinking about why they're stressed is a very interesting way of considering how to have impact. So let's think about stress. What is stress? Your brain producing adrenaline and cortisol. It has 3 typical impacts on most people, and there's probably doctors in here that know more, but I will just say. It makes you kind of anxious and paranoid in terms of not always thinking straight, being slightly suspicious, can sometimes make you more aggressive and hypervigilant, looking for danger. And when it becomes too much, you can end up becoming slightly paralyzed from action. It can make you freeze. So some of the behaviors we've just mentioned are byproducts of this kind of this mental and neurological process. When people are stressed, those are the things that they do. And I'll give you an example from my time at Babylon working in Rwanda. So, Rwanda, beautiful country, has had its challenges. The local subsidiary was called Babel, and we had 2.5 million people registered in our medical service. That's about half the population, and we did 8,000 consultations a day in one of the poorest countries in the world. For those who aren't familiar with the history of Rwanda, there was a genocide many years ago which basically caused many challenges when it comes to medical provision. Lots of people who were doctors and lots of those institutions were removed. And that still has a legacy today. So there's just not that many doctors. There's not that many clinicians. And there's still a huge medical need. So what I worked on was building an AI tool. And this AI tool was primarily built for doctors to help save time. So the idea was, if there's so few doctors, let me build an AI tool to make their time more efficient and to help them. And the ultimate goal was to help task shift and upskill, getting other people to do tasks that doctors could do and helping other people think like doctors were. Brilliant. Will help in the medical system. Amazing. The current journey for a patient in Rwanda as it is today was, if you're sick, you go to a little hut or a health center and you queue for up to a whole day, basically. It's a really inefficient system. Lots of people get sick before you get to see a doctor. So I was like, okay, I'm responsible. I built this AI tool. It's safe, but we should really test it with a doctor as a kind of sidekick to see what it works like. So what we decided to do was, we've got this captive audience of people just queuing for a whole day, not being able to earn money. So why don't I actually get a doctor sitting with a tablet with the AI, and that was a Babylon doctor that we paid for, and then we'll go through the AI, this kind of Q&A system to help work out what's wrong with you, a bit like ChatGPT, but better. And once that patient has been through that journey, we then pay for a separate doctor. A normal doctor would have worked in the surgery. We're like, we're going to help the system, paying for a doctor ourselves, and they'll just 15 minutes time be able to see a doctor instead of queuing for a whole day. Brilliant. So we're like testing this system with our Babylon doctors to see if it's any good. But then something weird happened. Those doctors who we paid for, who usually work at the surgery, said, you've done something to our patients. There's something different happening that we weren't expecting or even cared about. We weren't measuring that. We're just a feedback from the doctors saying there was something different. Those doctors saw an improvement in the patients who had that AI journey. Those patients who came to them, they were clearer and more articulate about their problems and what was wrong with them. They felt more confident. And that doctor said, I've saved time with this patient, and it took much less time for me to get a good outcome. So the thing we were trying to do, which was saving time for doctors, happened in a completely unexpected way because we hadn't understood our patients and users properly. What we had walked in and thinking was that our patients are stressed because they're sick. Without realizing, I'd simplistically thought that, I have to show them what healthcare is. They're not able to understand themselves what the best healthcare is for them. Kind of very myopic thinking. And that came from an interesting kind of piece of information. The most common symptom for someone suffering from depression in Rwanda, and there is a big population because of the genocide, is a headache that won't go away. Patients aren't able to advocate for themselves to even describe their symptoms to get all the help they need. So in my head, I was like, we need to help the doctors to get more patients through. But what I'd missed was the reason that the patients weren't speaking to doctors wasn't because of education, it was because of authority. The history of Rwanda meant that patients were very scared with figures of authority, and they weren't feeling comfortable advocating for themselves. And what we'd ended up creating with this AI tool was a really simple way of having patients advocate for themselves and understand what was wrong with them before they went to speak to a figure of authority. I had mistakenly been thinking about patients and users in the wrong way. Because what I'd actually ended up doing is realizing that the skybeam and the stress of the users wasn't their sickness, it was the figures of authority. Understanding that and focusing on that actually helped reduce that stress far more than I would have expected. And it had a much less expected side effect, which was patients seemed to trust the doctor less than the AI. They wanted to prefer to use the AI system to diagnose what was wrong with them, which is a form of success, but not necessarily the form of success that I wanted. So it's worth thinking about, how do you treat your users and your patients? And in case I'm kind of being too negative about treating users as sheep, ultimately, yeah, people can be sheep. We just have to accept that, people texting and walking around is not the best action. So my second area to talk about is, what is the thing that's causing your users the most stress, and how do you navigate and mitigate that? And finally, the villain's challenge. Why real change is so hard. So let me paint a story which is probably very, very common to many, many people. We have a situation where we don't have enough users in our app. I'm sure many, many people have had that happen to them. What do you do about it? So this was during the COVID-19 times at the NHS app. So people were saying there's not enough users of this COVID app. So they had a meeting, very senior meeting. I was a senior director there. So it was a director level meeting, 30 different people on the Zoom call. Someone came and presented some research. And the person who presented the research said, black men and the Muslim community have lower use of test and trace and the app. Okay, that might be a statistical fact. Good. People in the room, someone, said in this Zoom call, well, if these people don't want to work with us, what can we do? It's not our fault that they're not listening. Which comes back to that kind of sheep or mob labeling of users. And it was infuriating. We're doing healthcare and we're subjugating and separating people because they're not doing what we want them to do. So I kind of stopped, I waited, and I thought, do you know what? Someone of these 30 is going to say something. They didn't. No one said anything, so I calmly put my hand up and asked a question. Without making it judgmental, without labeling it, without trying to make anyone feel bad, I said, we're not trying to separate, we can understand why people aren't using healthcare because, over-policing, kind of criminal justice, blah, blah, blah. There's certain communities that aren't engaged. But in doing that, I got quite an interesting response. The two people who made those comments justified their behavior, as did many, many other people on the call. The room turned against me, and I was very cautious and very careful not to be judgmental and not to make anyone feel bad. But yet, something happened in that room. As an aside, I'll just tell you, the way we got through that conversation was to commission research, like a good product manager. And to summarize, I managed to show that the room that I was speaking to had assumed that everyone trusted the government, because why wouldn't they? They worked in government. But doing research with general public showed that they didn't trust Boris Johnson and they were unsure about government. But when you looked at these people who were rejecting the service, they didn't trust the government and they didn't trust Boris Johnson. And because the services we were delivering were so closely tied to government, it made them have a question mark around everything else. So the way to kind of unblock this potential bias was just to use research and ask the right question. But coming back to that kind of angry mob, what was the sin that I'd committed? What was the thing that I'd done that was so wrong? I just asked an innocent question. I hadn't done anything untoward. I was careful not to be aggressive. But the thing I had done was challenge the status quo. There was received wisdom up there that these groups and these people act in certain ways. Challenging that was seen as a threat. And it wasn't just a threat to the person who made the statement, it was a threat to the room. Everyone around me was pushing back against the idea that somehow that couldn't be true. And to illustrate this, I'll ask one question of the room, so a bit more audience participation. There's two different groups of people out there in the world. Group one, they need to be liked. They defend the status quo. They're happy with how things are. They're reactive. They usually wait till something happens. and they're comfortable. They're not looking to improve, they're looking to keep things the way they are. Group 2 don't need to be liked. That's not their reason for existing. They challenge because they know today's not perfect. They're proactive and they have a plan, and they're constantly striving. They know better can exist. So my question is, what are you and what do you want to be? So I'm going to say hands up for the blue and then hands up for the pink. So hands up for the blue. Who wants to be on the left-hand side? Okay, maybe leading. Okay, hands up for the pink. Who wants to be in the pink? Okay, we've got much more hands up there, which is good. Now let's stop and think about this. Written like this, everyone wants to be in the pink. But if we go back to our superhero analogy, heroes aren't the ones with the plan. Heroes are the ones that react to the villain's plan. Heroes are the ones that are comfortable with the way the world is. They're not looking for change. Because ultimately, villains are the ones that are challenging the status quo. They're the ones that want change. Of course, how they do it and their methodology might be wrong, but what they're trying to achieve is actual fundamental change. And that's the reason that creating change is so hard overall. Villainy can be good. So when you think about what happens when you challenge the status quo, many people would have felt this. When you put your hand up and try and push against what the received wisdom, the first thing that happens is you are scapegoated. You're the person that's the problem because you're pushing against something which is seen to be good. The next challenge is you're then framed in a negative way. I cannot emphasize this enough. This happens, and it happens in such an insidious way you don't even realize what's happening. When you raise your hand and try and challenge something, you are made to feel like you're wrong. It's a bit like at your school. Like someone keeps saying, you're a this, or your parents keep accusing you of a crime. Eventually you're just going to do it because you're like, oh, F it, I might as well. And in the framing of you being a villain and everyone pushing against you, it's so easy to say, F it all and turn into the villain they expect you to be. It is incredibly dangerous to do that because that's what you're being invited to do. If you are being silenced, it makes creating systemic or fundamental change in a product, in a service, in your company, in the world, much harder. Because creating challenging the status quo makes people feel uncomfortable. You have to realize that because you need discomfort to make change. Making that kind of challenge means that people vilify you, but you have to reject the framing of you being a villain. You can't fall into that trap. Because simply being vilified means they can ignore the point you're trying to make. If you're wrong and you're a villain, it means they can ignore the fundamental impact of what you're trying to achieve. Because there's a fundamental truth here. Who are the people that generally speak out? Women, people of colour, the LGBT community. Those who have to speak out because the things that are happening today don't work for them. So the fourth thing we can do is try and give them a voice. And yes, I'm sorry for being a little bit preachy, but genuinely this is something that happens, which is why change is so hard to make. Change is hard because we don't want to be seen as villains. That social contract with your colleagues means that you want to kind of stay nice, play nice, be nice. But if you're a person who's being disadvantaged, that silence doesn't help you. And I will quote something written many years ago. Martin Luther King says, we need to recapture the revolutionary spirit in a hostile world. Something that's hostile to poverty, racism, and militarism, which can only be done by challenging the status quo. If we don't do this, we don't get change. And before I get off my soapbox, I will tell you, just saying you're challenging the status quo doesn't mean you're right. Plenty of evil people do it, as you hear in politics. So I'll finish by saying, why is saving the world so hard? Because we're scared of being villains. So my invitation to everyone is, without punching cats, of course. So in summary, the superhero's challenge is not to act like a savior. The bystander's challenge is to understand what's causing you stress and having products that don't increase your stress. It's so easy when your users aren't doing what you want just to put more pressure on them to do that. And finally, the villain's challenge is to not be vilified. Now, before I go, I thought I'd just give you a little side quest story of something that happened in Nigeria. So, I was invited to Lagos, and one of my colleagues decided to get a tailor to make me a traditional Nigerian outfit. Similar to actually an Indian outfit. So, brilliant. I was in my hotel room, being measured up, and apparently the way to be measured up in Nigeria is to stand in your underwear while you're being measured. So that was quite an interesting experience. And as I was there, standing in my underwear, the Nigerian tailor was asking me, making small talk. I was like, what football team do you support? And basically, football for me is like lots of sweaty men running after each other. It's like slow motion pornography. I don't get it. So I was like, this is not a conversation I need to engage in. I was like, I don't follow football. It's not for me. His response, you're the first white man I've met who doesn't like football. Even more frustrating, being in my underwear where I was literally being cupped and measured by this man, was like, what is happening here? So, as a side note, it was interesting. Spoke to a colleague and I was like, what is going on? He can see me, surely. And the response was, in his mind, he was like, well, you're not black and you appear to have money. So guess what? Yes, I too can be a white savior. So I invite all of you to try being a white savior once in a while. And I will finish by saying, thank you for my little rant, and feel free to call me at some point maybe. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Randeep. I'll take the